I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Welcome back to Hard Knocks, everyone. This is Amanda Knox. Today's guest is Dr. Michael Shermer, who is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine and host of the podcast, The Michael Shermer Show. So for those who are not familiar with Michael Shermer, he has spent 30 years teaching in colleges and universities about critical thinking. He worked for 18 years doing a monthly column for Scientific American, and he's the author of numerous books exploring issues about reality, truth, good and evil, including why people believe weird things and the science of good and evil. His most recent book is Truth: What It Is, How to Find It, and Why It Still Matters. And it's that we discuss here in this particular episode. And I tried to sort of get the first half of this episode is me just trying to get into a general conversation with him about what is truth, how do we find it, why it still matters. But ultimately what I was really excited about was getting into big questions about consciousness and free will and debating that. And so I hope you enjoy the discussion. Mr. Dr. Michael Shermer, how are you today? It's great to meet again.
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, it's all good.
Are you excited about your book being out? How is it going? How's it feeling?
It's going well. I've been doing a lot of media for it, and the reception's been pretty good. Most of the people, they want to talk about religion or aliens or whatever. There's nothing about trans and DEI and wokeness and all that in the book because I figured that'd be kind of a dead topic, but that's come up a few times just because it's a cultural hot button issue, I guess. Same thing with immigration. Although I just kind of make the general point that there are political truths that I think are different from empirical truths, in which whoever's in power is the one that's going to run the experiment for a while and see how it goes. There's no right number of immigration. There's what different countries do and what their policies are, and those are different experiments, as it were. And then the Democrats get into power, and then the Republicans get into power, and so they run different percentages. And that's a different kind of truth, I think, than an empirical truth claim.
Right. Okay, well, let's talk about that because I think that's an important distinction, and the conversations that you're having around this book and what people are looking for as guidance from your book is really interesting. So people are in your current conversations, and I guess for the audience, we should do a little bit of background. You and I have spoken much before. I've been on your podcast. You've been on mine. We have a little bit of a history. I've written for Skeptic before, and it's been great. I feel like I have it's almost like I've been your student before, but I've never been your student before because we're interested in similar topics. Truth, and you have written a number of books all about trying to tease apart what's real, what's not real. This book is Truth: What It Is, How to Find It, and Why It Still Matters. And I think the thing that really struck me initially from that title is why it still matters, as if it's stopped mattering or it's at the risk of it is stopping mattering. So what do you mean by why did you feel compelled to include still in the title? And is there any kind of legitimate, valid basis for questioning that?
Yeah, interesting question. No one's asked me that before, but that was actually the publisher's insistence of adding still, in the sense that first chapter is on postmodernism and post-truth and alternative facts and fake news and all these assaults on it. And there I'm arguing that none of this is true. We still care about the truth. So the still care about is they go, you got to put that in there. I'm like, okay. So, that's what I mean, that it's never really gone away, that the assaults on it are really positive claims about the way the world is, and you have to make your arguments and evidence for that, in which case, the moment you open your mouth, you've lost your bet that we're living in a post-truth world. Apparently, we are living in a truth-based world because you just made an argument, right? So the postmodernists and lit-crit deconstructionists and all that back in the 80s and 90s in the science wars, that science is just another narrative. It's the narrative of, white male capitalists and colonialists and so on, going back centuries, and that there's an absolute objective truth that's out there. All that's baloney. None of that's true. Aboriginal stories of their origins is just as valid as the Big Bang theory of the scientists or whatever. So we fought all those battles, and then that kind of went away in the 2000s. And then, around 2015 or so, the whole 16 and Trump and all that, fake news, alternative facts, Kellyanne Conway, disputing the size of Trump's speech audience, the largest ever, and you could see in the audience, in the photos, it wasn't. Well, these are alternative facts. Okay, what does that mean? Right. So I kind of address both those. I think both sides do a lot of spin doctoring. That's probably not lying per se. A lot of politics is just spin doctoring. And, the whole point for them is not truth, the way the world actually is, but, our truth, or this is the way our party thinks, with some flexibility a little bit here and there. But for the most part, if you're a conservative, you hold these beliefs. If you're a liberal, you hold those beliefs. And that's what we're doing. And if you stray too far from that truth, you're considered a flip-flopper and a wishy-washy, mamby-pamby bedwetter and so on. You don't belong in our tribe. And I do think that's very different from the way scientists, at least in principle, are supposed to be thinking. So I make that distinction there. And then religion's, its own thing entirely different as well. And, so I think it helps to put these in different bins and go, oh, I see, you're arguing from over here. What I'm talking about is over there, something like that.
Okay, great. So in terms of people arguing against the idea of objective reality, one thing that you firmly establish in this book is there is objective reality, right? Like we can have faith that there is an objective reality, and that faith is based upon scientific principles. We have the ability to interact with this world, to obtain information about this world that is replicable, and these are all hypotheses, but they are justified, belief claims about an objective reality that does in fact exist. So that's like a premise of this book. And you confront various different situations where truth claims are made, and you've separated them out into the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the known unknowables. So I'm gonna say that again for those who are just listening. The known knowns, so things that we know. The known unknowns, so things that we know we don't know. And then the known unknowables, which are things that we know we can't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Very nicely said. Perfectly put.
Okay.
You're channeling Donald Rumsfeld perfectly.
I just want to be on the same page as everybody. Why is it important? You're talking about truth claims and putting them into different buckets. Why is it important to create those different kinds of truth buckets in order to engage with them?
Well, because people are often talking past each other. They're in different bins entirely, and they just go round and round and don't even realize they're talking about something completely different. So in science and rationality, we assume that there is an objective reality to be known, even though we will never know with 100% certainty because we're not deities. We're not omniscient. And
this all could be the Matrix.
It's right. Could be the Matrix. Yeah, even there, that's one of those thought experiments. Do you look out the window? Does it look like it's fake? Do you see buffering? Oh no, there goes Amanda's face. Well, that's the buffering of the internet. But in the real world, no, I don't think so. So, there's those kinds of truths, and so that's called fallibilism. We may be wrong. So I take a Bayesian approach. You put some percentage on it between 1% and 99% confident level that the claim is true. And that allows you to then change your mind. You can say, well, okay, my priors, that is what I know about the evidence for X claim at the moment, tells me it's 10% true or 50% true or whatever. Take the lab leak hypothesis. I always put that like at 30 or 40% and then bumped it up to like 50% when more evidence came in. Now I think it's like 70, 80%. We'll never know for sure because the Chinese are not forthcoming about these things. But there you can allow yourself to change your mind without like, oh, I can't change my mind. I'll be a flip-flopper. I'm betraying my party, my tribe, my religion, whatever. So what I'm trying to do is get people to get off that page of like, these are my self-identified beliefs and I can't give them up or else, I'm going to lose myself, something like that. And the more we can get away from that, the more then it's a virtue to change your mind. If the evidence changes, you should change your mind. And if it doesn't, then don't.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to stay a moment on Bayesian reasoning. Bayesian? Is that how you pronounce
yeah.
it? Bayesian.
Yeah.
Okay. Bayesian. Is how I was,
Bayesian, yes.
Bayesian reasoning, because I've heard that. So sometimes when people throw terms like that at me, sometimes I feel like they go in one ear and out the other. But I think your book really made it easy for me to digest. Like, oh, okay, what you're saying is that a belief is not a binary. It's not I believe this or I don't believe this. You say, I think this is likely. And to this amount. And sometimes you can say, people can say, I'm lukewarm on that, or that really is resonating with me. I'm feeling, and that's it. You're just putting a number to that feeling. And I think that that's great, because I've encountered that idea before of asking someone how much, like, if you could quantify it in a percentage, like, how much do you actually believe that thing? And that's the first, like, if you had to go 1 to 10, do you believe this to be true? How confident are you that this is true, this belief that you've claimed? And as soon as you introduce that idea, if someone is willing to say, well, it's an 8 out of 10, as opposed to 10 out of 10 or 0 out of 10, like, once you introduce that idea and they respond with, well, there's some room for growth, then you can have a conversation that could introduce new ideas, new evidence. It's when you encounter people who say, well, out of 1 to 10, absolutely 10, 100%, or absolutely 0%, that you can't really have a conversation. Do you find that it's possible to have conversations with people who believe 100%, if you were to ask them, like, this one belief claim is true? Is it possible to converse?
I do occasionally encounter, that's usually a religious belief. How confident are you that the resurrection happened and Jesus died for our sins? Oh, 100%. You'll hear Christians say that.
Sure.
It's like, well, but you're not God, right? Yeah, I know I'm not God. So you're fallible, and so you could be wrong. Yeah, but I really, really, really believe this, right? Okay,
Sure.
So they're not thinking of the resurrection in that case as a empirical claim. They're just saying, look, I'm a Catholic, that's what we believe, something like that.
Right.
Okay, that's it's a different kind of thing. The analogy I use in the book is, when the preacher says that there's a parking lot behind the church, the parishioners can go, oh yeah, well, I'll go check it out when I'm leaving today. Then it either is true or it's not. But when the preacher says, the Father is, 3 in 1, 1 in 3, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, the Trinity, the average listener is like, yeah, whatever, okay. How are they going to know? How are they going to fact check that? They're not, right? So they just accept it or they don't. And, a lot of our beliefs are like that. I mean, certainly a lot of religious beliefs are like that, where you hit epistemological bedrock, you can't really go any further, and you just go, yeah, I either believe it or I don't. And unfortunately, a lot of political beliefs are like that. I wish they were more Bayesian. So back to your Bayesian thing, so there's something called Cromwell's rule. Oliver Cromwell famously said, I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, you might be mistaken. He was making it a political point, but that's now called Cromwell's rule in Bayesian reasoning. Never assign a 0 or a 1 to anything. Just in case, you might be wrong. It could be 0.01, fine, or 99.9%, fine, but not 1 or 0. Okay, so to any claim like that, so was the 2020 election rigged? Okay, I never personally went to any of these polling booths to see for myself. Let me see that video of the truck backing up behind the polling booth in Phoenix or wherever that was online. And I didn't see what was in the... But who does is the Justice Department. And Attorney General Bill Barr was a lifelong Republican, voted for Trump twice. And he said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And he did. And said, you know what? We didn't find any fraud. Okay, I didn't see this personally, but I trust the institutions work most of the time, right? So, and science works very much like that. The famous experiment I talk about in the book of my friend Andrew Stillman at Occidental College asked undergraduate students, do you accept Darwin's theory of evolution? Most of them go, oh yeah, of course. All right, what is it? Well, the giraffe stretches its neck and the baby giraffes have longer necks. No, that's not it at all, right? So most people are just signaling, yeah, I guess the scientists usually get it right. The Big Bang probably happened, the theory of evolution, germ theory of disease. Yeah, okay, fine. Most of us don't have time to fact check all these things, right? So back to the truth, we really depend on other people. Institutions, experts really still matter. Education matters. Having, some background material on a subject matters. It's not to say that outsiders never get it right. There are, but some people send me these theories of everything physics papers, and they'll share the Nobel Prize with me if I help them with the math. I go, you got the wrong guy. I don't do physics. But, how do I know that guy's not the right one? Maybe he's the next Einstein. Maybe, but probably not, because he's like the 100th person to send me one of these papers. And, no training. They never went to school. They didn't try it out on the local physics teacher to ask them, that kind of thing. That tells me I don't really need to read this paper carefully. He's probably not right. Much of our knowledge is like that.
Okay. Do you think that the fact that we are social beings and we depend on each other just socially compromises our ability to approximate the truth, or does it help us to find the truth?
Well, both. It depends. It's context dependent. I mean, most of my career has been debunking nonsense and studying why people fall for cults and things like that. And but the fact is, most of us, most of the time, are fairly rational. We keep, gas in the tank and, money in the bank, and we're able to raise our kids and, just kind of leave normal lives. That requires a lot of rationality and assumption that certain things are true. My money's going to actually be good tomorrow like it is today, and, so forth. And, much of the world works that way, and where you depend on other people. So when we look at cult examples, like Scientology or NXIVM or any of these, or the Tinder swindler on Netflix, I talk about that a lot. They got these 4 women that wired this guy, tens of thousands of dollars. How gullible do you have to be to do that? Well, first of all, we don't know how many women he tried this out on, right? Do you know who I'm talking about, the Tinder swindler? Yeah.
I'm aware of it. I didn't study the case closely, but yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, so these are women in their mid to late 30s. They've never been married. They're looking for love. They're on Tinder. They swipe right. There's this handsome guy with a plane. They're like, yeah, okay, that would be nice, but I don't know, So they go out on a date with him, and they're on the plane. It's like, whoa, okay, I'm on his plane. And they go to this 5-star resort, and everything happens great. 10,000 texts, love bombing. We're going to get married. We're going to have kids. You're the one. I've been waiting my whole life for you. And this goes on and on for months, right? So lots of social cues, like this guy's not bullshitting me. He's not a con artist, and so on. And then, after like 6 months of this, he goes on this business trip to Europe somewhere. And then like on Saturday night late, he calls the woman and says, the bank doesn't open on Monday. I have to close this deal tomorrow. It's like a $200 million deal. I need $20,000. Darling, please, baby, you're the one. Can you send me the money? And that's the moment, right? But the problem is so they had the 4 women that fell for this. But how many women did he try this out on? And nothing happened. They told him to screw off or whatever. We don't know, right? Same thing, Scientology or NXIVM. And, most of the women in NXIVM did not get the initials branded on their crotch by with that guy Keith Rainier. So I tend to think we're not that gullible, and most of the time, most of us are reasonably rational.
Okay. So you do have faith in humanity.
Confidence.
Confidence in humanity. Okay, great. I'm curious to talk about, I want to sort of have a discussion about the first parts of your book. I will say that I was most curious of all the parts in your book about the known unknowables, because those are super fun conversations for me to have. And I really enjoyed your conversations about obtaining a kind of objective morality, which I thought was interesting. But then, of course, I came across your free will argument, and I was just the entire time going, but that's determinism. So I want to get into a lot of this, but first I want to sort of lay the groundwork a little bit for our listeners. So you've written that people don't believe things because they're true, but because those beliefs serve psychological needs. What are those needs?
Yeah, so some of that's the theory that we evolved the capacity to reason. This is Hugo de Vries and Dan Sperber's theory, that we evolved the capacity to reason to win arguments for our tribe, for our clan, our group, our religion, our political party, whatever, and that it's not veridical perception. That is to say, we didn't evolve reason to have a more accurate picture of the world, but rather to win the argument for our tribe. Okay, that's the theory. The other one is that we evolved to have an accurate model of the world. So I think both of those are true in part, as you know, since you wrote that article for Skeptic, and all the cognitive biases that we're all subject to, that's all part of the use of reason to win an argument, not to find out what's actually true. So there's many hurdles to go over for rational animals to overcome these, and it's really hard. Even training programs to teach students what to look for, like here's the confirmation bias, the hindsight bias, the my side bias. They go through a couple dozen of these. They learn what to look for, what to listen for, and they get better at seeing that in other people. But they still don't see it in themselves. This is the bias, right? We have a bias, and no one, as far as I know, in these training programs has figured out how to do that. It's just really difficult. So, I think it's both true. I mean, there has to be some accurate perception of the world, or else we wouldn't survive.
Sure.
But distorting it in a particular way that helps my group versus some other group. So this is the theory that our brains are evolved more like lawyers than scientists, as you know. The point of a lawyer is to win the case. It isn't to find out what really happened. I saw this interview with Alan Dershowitz the other day with Barry Weiss. And she asked him, how many of your clients were guilty? And he goes, how many of them? All of them. I'm an appellate attorney. That's not, my job isn't to decide who's guilty or not. My job is to get them off. It's like, oh, okay. I think people forget that, but what really happened? It's like the lawyers don't care what really happened. The point is to win. You, unfortunately, are the victim of that. But the scientist says, hang on, we want to find out what's actually true. And these are very different ways of thinking. So this counter theory of reason is that we're more like lawyers than scientists.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it's frustrating because in a way, depending on what the reality is that you're debating, if it's like a social reality, well, then the social consequences are thus that you can just pretend that that's the truth and then proceed as if it is the truth. And then in a weird way, it becomes the truth because there's, objective reality isn't imposing itself on like the socially constructed reality that you want, except perhaps maybe consequences down the line. I mean, I'm speaking in weird metaphysical terms about something that's very real in the sense that, like, I'm just thinking about how the guy who even murdered my roommate, he didn't end up being held fully accountable, and now he's out of prison, and now he's on trial again for having assaulted another young woman. And it's like, well, would that have happened if he had not been held fully responsible? That's where like finding objective reality is very purposeful and has a good reason.
Yeah, the problem, I guess, in the legal system, how would you modify it? Professional jurors or, I don't know, training for judges on these things, what to look for. I'm not sure. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. I'd love to hear those. But that's the way truth is found in the legal system is the adversarial system. And the jury or the judge, they're the peer review. Is it? I don't know.
But
is
they're
it
not
good?
experts.
They're not experts. I
yeah.
mean, this idea of a jury of your peers. Oh my God! Have you seen your peers? Don't forget the lesson of the bell curve. Half the people are below the mean, right?
Yeah,
I've
totally.
seen some of them just at not traffic school, but just the local when I have to serve as jury duty. Oh my God! I had one last year. I'll tell you the story. It's kind of funny. You'll appreciate this, but it was a sexual assault minor. Not a minor case, whatever that means. Okay. And that's all we were told. We saw the guy, we saw the woman, their lawyers are sitting next to them. All we're told is, can you be objective in this case? It's a sexual assault, minor violation, whatever that's called. And I don't know, maybe people are just making shit up to get off of jury duty, but it's like, well, I'm pretty sure I can't be objective because, my girlfriend was assaulted once, or, I was assaulted when I was 6. I think this guy he should go straight to jail right now. It's like, what? The judge is like, you're excused. Yeah. And one after another, I thought, holy shit, if I ever get accused of something, I'm buying the best lawyer money can buy. Oh my God, this whole system is just nuts.
Yeah. No, fair. Yeah, no, don't get me started about jury duty and what we should do about that.
I wonder if you served on jury duty, if they went, it's Amanda Knox. No,
Well,
you're out.
I've tried to serve on jury duty and they won't take me because I know too
Right.
much. Yeah, it's a
That's
shame
right.
because I feel like I would actually be more fair, but it selects for ignorance, which is unfortunate.
Well, see, there they probably want to be able to manipulate, each lawyer wants to manipulate the jury, right? And if you know what's going on, then there's like, goodbye.
Right. So,
Not good.
well, exactly. And so it's not a good system for determining truth because it's not it's not like a scientific method system. Let's say that the criminal legal system let's say it's using all of the techniques that you bring to light in this book, the Bayesian reasoning, signal detection theory, double-blind experiments. Like, what would that look like in a criminal legal setting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if I had my way, it would be professional jurors, well paid. They've all had courses and training like any other profession, in this case on critical thinking and all the cognitive biases. And here's the things to look out for. Here are the things that each lawyer is going to say in these types of cases. Here's how to evaluate evidence. Here's how to rank evidence based on, eyewitness versus forensic or whatever, but they don't, the person, the way our system's set up is just randomly walks in and they're in. So yeah, I think a professional, I know there's objections to this. I'm not, but I don't know. I don't like the objections. I really like judges are trained, right?
Right.
Why wouldn't juries be trained? They're the peer review.
Right.
And in peer review, these are your fellow scientists. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe there's one that doesn't like you or something, and they can tell it's your paper based on the references or whatever. But for the most part, most of the people evaluating your scientific paper, they're trying to do a good job. So, it's better than nothing.
One thing that I've certainly advocated for, and it's something that we don't do here in the United States, but they do in Italy, is having motivated verdicts. So the verdict can't just be, the verdict is guilty or innocent. It's actually a little bit more Bayesian in the sense that the jury, and actually it's the judge who ultimately writes this down because the judge sort of participates with the jury in deliberations and deciding. But ultimately what they have to do is they have to give the verdict, so guilty or innocent, but then they have to write out an explanation of how they came to that verdict. And they have to say, this is the evidence that we found compelling, this is the evidence that we didn't find compelling, and ultimately we derived a sense of confidence in this verdict as opposed to that verdict. And it is based upon this it's a motivated reason that people can then come in later and say, well, that doesn't make sense logically. Like, you can sort of attack the logic of the verdict. Or you can say, years later, that testimony that they gave all of this great credence to has recanted. And so we can now reevaluate the case on a more objective, level because we know how the reasoning took place. And I think one of the mistakes that we make in our society here is not only that jurors are sort of they're not informed, they're not given all of the skill sets they need in order to make the right decision, but we also treat their decision as sort of like sacred and secret so that we can't even access it in order to determine whether or not it's founded, it's justified.
I like that system a lot you described in Italy. That would be good to know. Our appeals are usually just the lawyer screwed up on day 2 when they said this and they should have said that, or the cops interviewed him in the McDonald's, the guy, the Mangione guy, and they said the wrong thing.
Right.
It's like, really? You're going to let this guy out because they said the wrong thing? Come on.
Right. Yeah, no, it's all procedural as opposed to on an evidentiary basis. And it allows more opportunity to re-examine the logic behind the evidence, which I think is smart. And it allows for people to re-examine cases on the basis of objective fact as opposed to procedure, which is what we end up doing here.
Now maybe we should just use Grok or Gemini as the juror.
It's an interesting idea. People have been talking about how can lawyers or now juries use those tools to help give them the information that they wouldn't, they would just take too much time for them to find out on their own. So it's super interesting. So I want to talk. I want to talk to you about the known unknowables, because I feel like we could spend all day talking about them. Of course, I could talk to you about beliefs come first and explanations come later, and the role of belonging in shaping belief. But I feel like this is all territory that we've already talked at length about before. So instead, I want to get into like the fun, weird stuff.
Okay.
Consciousness. What is the hard problem of consciousness?
Yeah, so the easy problem is explaining how the wiring works. This is where the color red is processed in the occipital lobe at the back and is transduced over to here and so forth. The hard problem is, what's it like to be the wires? That is, what's the feeling of redness or whatever. That's the so-called hard problem. David Chalmers famously won a bet against Christoph Koch just last April, a year and a half ago now. That it would be solved in 25 years. They made this bet back in the 90s, and it's not resolved.
No.
My opinion, along with free will and a couple others that we'll discuss, is that the way it's termed, the terminology, the concept, the conceptual description of the problem is such that it will never be resolved. It's one of these, what I'm calling unknown unknowables. Unknown is like dark energy, dark matter. We'll get there. We'll figure out what that is. Excuse me. It's just a linguistic placeholder that cosmologists use for, there's something going on here that's holding the galaxies together. We can't figure out what it is. We'll call it dark matter. Okay. But they don't mean that as an explanation. They're just saying, we'll figure it out. But when you talk about the hard problem of consciousness, to me, it feels like it's conceived in a way that there's no scientific experiment that's going to go, oh, that's the explanation. Now, I could be wrong, but if you look up just Wikipedia, there's like 20 different theories of the hard problem of consciousness. Like, okay, no one has agreed, like, that's the one. Or these are the three that are better than all the others. There's no agreement on that. And to me, again, what's it like to be a bat? Thomas Nagel's famous paper. How the hell should I know? I'm a human. I'm not a bat. And, I think it's a dualistic concept. Like, well, imagine what it's like to be a bat. You have the echolocation and you have wings. And at some point, I would just be a bat.
Right.
If I really knew, I wouldn't be
You wouldn't
a little...
a human imagining being a bat. You would be a
Exactly.
bat. Right.
Exactly, right. But the way it's conceived is like the little Shermer homunculus goes over into your brain and goes, oh, now I know what it's like to be Amanda Knox. No, nothing like that's happening. Like Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan switch bodies in Freaky Friday and hilarity ensues, right? This can't happen. You are your body. There's no switching bodies.
Right. So the main point being that your body is the thing that gives rise to consciousness. So you can't just remove your consciousness from your body and think that it will remain intact, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so there's another sort of debate that you bring up in this chapter, which has to do with what comes first. Is the consciousness that comes first that gives rise to the brain, or is it the brain that gives rise to consciousness? Why is there debate around that? Because I feel like, and not just on like a soulful level. I think there are those who would argue that like the consciousness, the mind is they're in that dualistic reality where there is a soul and then there's a body. But let's put aside the dualistic notion. Is there debate? And I think you bring it up, even from those who are not arguing, who aren't arguing dualism. So people who acknowledge that consciousness cannot exist without the brain. Are there those who are arguing that consciousness gives rise to the brain?
Well, sort of. I mean, Deepak Chopra and some of the kind of Western Buddhists. And then there's the, people like Anil Seth and others who think everything is at some degree conscious. And
I see. So like the universe itself is conscious.
Yeah, atoms are conscious. This pen is conscious on some basic level. I've never really bought into any of that. I mean, I'm much more behavioristic in my training, and it's just organisms are behaving a certain way, or if you want to go inside the black box, they're thinking a certain way, but it's neurons firing that's doing that. My dog has fewer degrees of freedom than I do, but he's still kind of conscious. He knows he exists.
Oh, I would argue that your dog's very conscious. Yeah, totally. Totally.
Yeah. His name is Hitch, named after the great Christopher Hitchens, and he's still going strong after 11 years. And, he knows what to expect. He's very conscious. He's not conscious like you and I. He doesn't know that, he's poor but honest or anything like that. But,
sure.
But he's got, all the way down to the insects or whatever. I mean, they're mostly robotic instincts, but they have some level of consciousness, all the way down to single cells following a gradient of light or chemical gradient of calories and so on. That's a kind of consciousness. But once you go down to physical objects, the cup,
rocks,
the pen, rocks, I don't really know what these guys are talking about. I've talked to them, I listen to them, I read their books. I'm like, I'm really not getting this. There's something spooky about consciousness that really freaks people out. It does feel, I have to admit, it feels like there's something else floating around up there beyond just the neurons firing. That's what it feels like. And everybody says that, but what else is it? I mean, once the brain is dead, like when you're under general anesthesia, where does your consciousness go? And the answer is it doesn't go anywhere. It just stops because the brain stops. It's like, where does your heartbeat go when your heart stops beating? It doesn't go anywhere. It just, there's no more heartbeat. That's my answer. But a lot of the consciousness people feel like it floats off and goes off into the quantum ether or whatever. Okay. But it depends what you mean by these terms. What does it mean to be aware, self-aware, meta-aware, sentient, conscious? Again, it's so, I don't know. The whole problem is presented in a way that I just don't see what the answer will be, scientifically. Like scientists will go, that's the explanation right there. I could be wrong, but.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to figure it out myself because it's something I think about a lot, especially because I do practice Buddhism and I do meditate, and I think a lot about or even those who try psychedelics and have, mystical experiences. Typically the end result is this idea that once the ego-ness of you goes away, that sense of self goes away, that feeling that we have that there is a me inside of here rolling around that has memories and desires and wants and all of that, that can be stripped down to something that is more basic and essential, which people have different names for, but what the tradition that I practice in is called no self. So it's the idea being that what remains after you strip all of those self-identifying properties away is just a sort of open and alert awareness, which is consciousness, that for which there is nothing good or bad. It just is. It's just kind of aware that things are happening. And I don't think that necessarily is contradicted by, because it could also, that awareness could stop functioning the minute we die, right? Like it could just poof, disappear. I think the thing that people, and this is why a lot of people recommend psychedelics and meditation before death, is that sense of peace that you get of letting the sense of self go. Like, oh, the Amanda is gone, but there's still a sense of awareness that isn't Amanda, but is there. And is there something universal about that alertness? Is your position that even that sort of non-identifying alertness has a limit, and that limit is within a neural network?
Yeah, well, that's where I'm putting in that category of unknowable. Yeah. Again, a lot of the words you're using here are very subjective and personal. I'm not sure what you mean. You know what you mean, but I'm not sure anyone else could know, short of doing it themselves. So I don't practice meditation, and I've never done ayahuasca or any of these mind-altering drugs. I guess I should. But let's say I do that, and I come back and go, Amanda, oh my God, I did ayahuasca. I found this whole other world, this spirit world that exists, and there's these spirit beings, and so I saw them myself. This is what people describe. It's like, and you're like, okay, how do I know if that's true? And I go, well, you take the ayahuasca, and you'll see. It's like, okay. So we may be bumping up against, again, you move from, personal subjective truths to these external objective truths. This seems to be one of those that's kind of in the middle. It's like, if I get inside my head and I try it through meditation or mind-altering drugs, I'll see, but I'm still in my head. Am I not?
Sure.
And so, like, when you do your meditation and you say, well, Amanda goes poof, but then when you come back, when you're done with your meditation session, here you are. You're doing your podcast. You're back.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Okay, where did Amanda go? If that's probably not even the right question, right?
Right, yeah, it's not. I think it's the thing that they would argue in meditation is that you realize that the Amanda itself never actually really existed. It's just a helpful illusion for me to navigate reality as a limited being in my body. Like, oh, it's people refer to me as Amanda. I have memories where I am associated with, like, this is my consciousness as I have been able to be experiencing reality, and that's how it's a very helpful illusion, but it's not the ultimate reality, which is like if you let go of everything, what remains is a non-identifying awareness that you're searching for. And this is like and especially I actually had a discussion about this with the head monk at my meditation hall yesterday, because he was talking about how this is a belief, right? You have like there's a faith that there is something there if you look for it, if you have the ability to sit still long enough to let go of those feelings of self. But it's a hypothesis that you get to test for yourself. And you're right that like the ultimate problem of consciousness is that we cannot have access to other people's consciousnesses. We can only have access to our own. But I do wonder if it is possible for subjective insight to be epistemically valid if we can apply the Copernican principle, which you bring up. Like, I'm not special. You're not special. So if I can empathize, if I have feelings like sadness or anger or joy, I can assume that you also have anger and sadness and joy. And I think you would argue that sadness and anger and joy are objective, right? Right?
Yep. Yeah, that's my argument for why I know you're not a philosophical zombie and I'm the only one who's actually sentient and conscious, and all the rest of you are robots. I could see that you're a person that has emotions and feelings, and chances are pretty good that I'm not special. So, you probably actually have those internal experiences. Maybe your sense of sadness is a little different from mine, but that overall feeling, I kind of get that. I think we can apply that to most things like that. I think there is a self.
Can we apply that to consciousness?
Well, I would say there's a self in that, there's a entity called Amanda that represents these different things. Now you're a wife and a mom and podcaster and a writer and researcher and so on. So that collection, maybe call it a fuzzy set. Maybe some of the stuff in your past will kind of disappear. It'll be less important. New things in your 30s and 40s and 50s and so on, they'll be more prominent. But there's kind of a fixed self. Like the big five personality, your openness to experience, your conscientiousness, and so on. That's you. It could be a little flexible, but that's you. Is that an illusion? I don't know. It maybe, but it's a pretty good illusion. I mean, it's you.
It's a useful illusion. Yeah.
It's a useful illusion. But again, what do you mean by self? What do you mean by free will? What do you mean by consciousness or sentience? I don't know. I mean, it gets kind of fuzzy.
Right, but you do know what it feels like to be you.
Yeah.
So there's something is there, and again, your position is that it's a feeling that is given rise to from the neural activity in the brain, which I agree with. Like, I'm not arguing against that. I think that it's the interesting question is like what happens when we disassociate our feelings of self with, like, I think it's interesting how in meditation, like, again, this is not mind altering in any way. You're just sitting quietly. You can have the subjective experience of not feeling like yourself anymore. And I'm just curious if you're interested in exploring that, because it is something that I think that anyone can experience merely from sitting still long enough. And it's not, it's not from deprivation. You're not doing anything damaging to your brain in order to get to that state of mind. But it is a state of mind that sort of opens up a different way of having a relationship with your sense of self when that you return to when you get off the cushion and start interacting with the world again.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
I probably
make
should
any
do
sense?
something like that. Maybe you'll talk me into doing your. I mean, there's different versions of meditation like this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Yeah. I practice the Zen tradition, but yeah.
And this is where you start with your breath. I did one at Deepak's place in Carlsbad where we had the little chanting, whatever they call mantra or whatever they call that.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was Yamaha. It's like I couldn't get the motorcycle out
The
of my head.
motorcycle out of your name, yeah.
Yes.
We don't do chanting, and
Okay.
or I mean, there's like some preliminary chanting typically at the very beginning, but mostly the tradition is that you sit in silence, and that's it.
Yeah.
Sit in silence.
I know you have to. Apparently, it takes a little while to get used to that, right? Because after a
It
while,
is.
I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so bored.
Well, but that's interesting that you say that, because your mind, I find, is utterly fascinating in that it's always moving. Like when you actually sit down and just sit with your mind, undistracted, your mind is constantly coming up with stuff. It's like you have movies upon movies upon movies that are happening. And you have, like, the reason you have to sit so long is because your mind has to go through all the movies. Like you're sitting there and your mind is thinking, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. And your mind has to get bored of thinking I'm bored in order to get to that place of like, oh, who am I? You know, like that's, I recommend it to you, Michael. It should be the
All right,
subject of
I'll
your
do
next
it.
book.
Okay. Maybe I'll try that for my next book. Who am I really?
Yeah.
I've discovered it.
What is this thing? If I really just sit still long enough, what is going on in here? Because again, like it is that frontier of there's no one else who could possibly know who Michael Shermer is. That's the only you have access to that. So if you delve into those depths, what can you discover there? I think is a interesting question.
I do think a lot of this, excuse me, is very much like religious truths for people. They just believe it. It works for them. It changes their life. You know, we know a lot of these people. Ayaan Hirsi Ali has a book coming out this year, apparently, about her conversion to Christianity, and it saved her, changed her life. You know, when people tell me these stories, I think, yeah, okay, whatever. I mean, that's your internal personal truth. I tried meditation, I tried this or that, and my life is better. I had a near-death experience, and now, you know, all this changed. Okay. You know, I don't object to any of that. But the moment you say, and you should too, or, you know, if you do this, then you'll see that my truth is the right one. It's like, okay, hang on. How come the Catholics believe this and the Jews don't believe that? How come? You know, and if it's really just this subjective, empirical, scientific thing, we should get to agreement on it.
Sure.
Now, in the consciousness thing or the free will, whatever, I mean, I could be wrong. You know, could be if I'm chronically frozen and brought back 500 years from now, I'm like, oh, it was number 23 answer. That was the right one. The global information workspace, whatever that one is.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That seems to be one of the popular ones. And, yeah. So, but again, what's it like to be the wiring? You know, how does the wiring work? Okay, good problem.
Right.
What's it like to be the wiring? What? Well,
Sure.
I don't know. That seems like a different conceptual problem.
It is. It absolutely is a different conceptual problem. Do you think it's one that's worth exploring as a truth claim, though, or is it the fact that because only individuals can have access to the individual? Like the reason why I asked about the Copernican principle is if it is possible for enough people to explore the depths of what it feels, what it means, what it is to be this thing, what it feels like to be an Amanda or to be a Michael. Is it possible to derive from that any kind of empirical evidence?
Oh, I think there is. I'm glad consciousness has become a field of study in science, not just philosophy, you know, starting with Francis Crick and Christoph Koch in the late 90s that made it okay. Because before that, it was a taboo subject. That was just, you know, the philosophy of mind is something you study like in graduate school philosophy. Right now, scientists are doing it, and there's, you know, thousands of them, and using MRI brain scanners and all that. Okay, that's all good. And I'm glad people like, you know, and Christoph, you know, recently did his own magic mushrooms or whatever he did to have a mind-altering experience to know what that's like. I should probably do that too. And the panpsychists, you know, these are now neuroscientists, not just philosophers that are
Right.
writing about it. So I think this is all good. Again, I think it's fairly new. And, my putting in this bin of the unknowable, maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe I did have Christoph on the show, and when I pointed out the, 23 different theories of consciousness, whatever it is, he pointed out that if you look up under Wikipedia, quantum physics, there's also like 24 different theories.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
yeah. Just because we don't fully understand it doesn't mean that it's unknowable. True.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. Although Feynman famously said, no one understands quantum physics. If you think you understand quantum physics, then you don't. It's like, okay, if Feynman says that, what hope do I have?
Right. Well, who knows? Like we didn't understand, the germ theory of, we didn't understand germ theory until we had better technology, better access to the thing that is the truth, all these little things that we can't see. Can I talk to you about free will? Because this is the part of the book
problem.
where same problem-ish. I wonder if, and this is something that I think is true, but maybe you can tell me if you disagree. I would argue, since especially you're somebody who is arguing that like neuroscience has really proven that like the consciousness is derivative of the brain, right? Like it's not the other way around. We have experiments where we can show how if you tweak the brain, suddenly like your entire personality changes, and like so it would seem that like the brain is the substrate, and then conscious awareness arises from that. Neuroscience has also shown, and you've brought this up in your own work, that decisions arise in our brain before we are even consciously aware of them. And in your discussion about being a compatibilist of free will, which for those who are listening, compatibilists say that the universe is determined, we are determined creatures, but that doesn't mean that we don't have free will. That doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to choose in the moment. And you write that it is determined but not predetermined. So everything up to this moment is determined, but somehow this moment, the present moment, is undetermined in a way that every moment leading up to it is determined. And I think that, like, for me, I kept butting heads with this because I kept feeling like I keep feeling like there's like just a reevaluation of what determined means. Like, are we changing the definition of determined if it's happening in the present moment as opposed to the past moment?
That is what I'm doing. I'm saying that the future going forward is not predetermined, and we are part of the causal net altering the future as we go through it. And that we have at least some role, some volition, whatever words you want to use, some will, to make decisions for ourselves going forward, or others, whatever, just to tweak the system this way or that way. The Heraclitus is you can't step into the same river twice. You're not the same person. The river's not the same.
Sure.
And, the rewind the tape and could you have done otherwise? Well, again, if it's a read-only memory tape and it's just a recording of what you already did, then no, that's determined because the past already happened. So I'm saying the future hasn't happened yet, and you can help alter it. Now, is that determined? I'm claiming it's kind of a self-determined. But these words, again, what do you mean by determined? What do you mean by free? No, we're not free like the libertarian free will. The little homunculus makes a decision. And if there was a little mini-me inside you, then there'd have to be a mini-me inside the mini-me.
Right.
And quantum physics doesn't help either. Quantum uncertainty doesn't give you free will. It's just randomness.
Yeah.
So it really
That's
comes
not a choice.
It comes down to what we were talking about already. There's a self, there's a you, and this is where I am today, and tomorrow I'd like to do the following things. I got to take my kid to school or whatever it is you're doing tomorrow, and so you're going to lay out, okay, I better get the lunch stuff for my kid and have that today so that tomorrow morning when I get up, I have this prep for my child or whatever. And then I'm going to drive to school and I'm going to do this and that. That's you doing all that. You're making those decisions. And nobody that's a determinist, as far as I could tell, actually believes that they're just, like a pinball bouncing around the world. They're actually acting like they're making choices. Now, maybe they're determined. Okay, again, what do you mean by that word? But most most psychologists and clinicians who work in the space that deal with people with addiction and anger issues or whatever, they really say that you can change yourself. You can just say, I'm going to do different tomorrow. Because tomorrow's not the same as yesterday. Tomorrow's future is going to be slightly different. So I'm going to do something slightly different than I did yesterday. Who's making that decision? You are. Anyway, that's my case for
Okay. Can I make the case for determinism for you?
Yeah,
and I just want to see what you would make of it, because I'm not saying that any of that is not true. And I don't think that anyone who's a determinist is suggesting that we're just ping pongs who are incapable of choices, right? Like the choice itself is the experience of choosing itself, however, is a determined thing, right? Like even the impulse to think, one of the things that you bring up is there's free will and free won't, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the impulse, and you bring up the man who cheats on his wife as an example, right? Mm. A man who's been faithful his whole life, one day decides to cheat on his wife, and then he goes to his wife and says, I'm sorry, I have no free will. I was determined to do mm-hmm. that. And already you are feeling, the wife slapping him across the face because how dare he even try to bring that argument to the table. In a way, though, he is correct in the sense that, in a way, if he has already done it, that it was his everything that led up to his decision in making in that moment, the impulse came from somewhere, and that somewhere was a determined space, right? He didn't just one day randomly get an impulse to cheat on his wife. That impulse to cheat on his wife was derived from the set of experiences and circumstances that led up to that moment, including his own thoughts and feelings, which you don't actually choose. The feelings that you feel are just mm-hmm. arise. The thoughts that you have just arise. So in that way, they are determined. That I don't think that determinism suggests, though, that we're just little robots that it does in a way. It's just we're very complicated robots, right? We are any impulse that we have to choose to do differently, for instance, is informed by the set of conditions that led up to this moment, including, saying that I step into the river and the river is not the same twice doesn't preclude a deterministic argument. You stepping into the river has changed the river, and you stepping out of the river has changed you in a deterministic way. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. But, okay, so, Amanda, let's say your husband, since you're happily married, does this very thing and says to you, Amanda, my will is simply not of my own making. My thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which I'm unaware and over which I exert no conscious control. I do not have the freedom you think I have. I mean, come on. Would you buy this?
So here's what I would do. I would say that is I would say, yes, that is true. And also, in the moment that you made that choice, you knew that there would be consequences if you made that choice. That's part of your determining process. Mm-hmm. The man cheating on his wife knows that if his wife found out about it, she would be upset and likely divorce him. And he still felt the impulse to do it anyway. And so, in a way, he's right. Every time we form a relationship, we are, in fact, making a contract with a future stranger because we don't know all of the things that are determining all of their choices in their entire life. Mm-hmm. So in a way, that is true. It doesn't mean that I don't get to slap him across the face and divorce him if he does that, because that's the consequence. And my impulse to do so is also determined because I have a set of expectations that are culturally informed and biologically informed. Mm-hmm. All of that is still determined.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, again, what do you mean by these words, self-determined versus determined? We're playing a bit of a linguistic game. I mean, what you say is true, and again, most compatibilists, and I'm one, and I'm heavily influenced by Dan Denon, who called himself a compatibilist, that, again, after the fact, yes, it was determined that the slap then altered his behavior, and maybe he never has another affair again because you slapped him and threatened him, and after the fact, that's determined, but there's still tomorrow, and it hasn't happened yet. So is that an illusion? Maybe. again, it depends what you mean by these words. So that's why I put this in the bin of unknowable. It's like this problem has been around since Aristotle's time, probably before that, right? So 2,500 years of the greatest minds in philosophy and neuroscience thinking about this, and we still don't have the answer. Compatibilists still, well, what's the compatibilist? That's the 59.1% in the last survey on this, the Dan Dennett position of compatibilism. That doesn't mean that they're right. I mean, the hardcore no free will, 12.2%. So you're in the minority. Not that any of that matters. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
But it does in the sense that when we're talking about a problem like this, that why has this not been resolved? Right.
Well, I think it's because of it's because of the core thing that you're talking about in the book, which is that certain people want certain things to be true, and so they find the belief comes first, and the explanation comes later. The rationality comes later.
Well, I would say that's true
want
for determinists
free will to be true,
and compatibilists too. We're just behaving. Okay, here's how the determinists would say it. People are behaving as if free will is true. They call it an as-if belief. Yeah, we do. Okay. And what I'm arguing is that it's not completely crazy to think that you are self-determining. You are changing your future. And you have some choice in that matter. You have some will. And what are you going to do tomorrow?
Well, if you're lucky enough to be the kind of person who has the biology and the history and the social inputs that help you to choose to do differently for the better in the future.
I agree. There are people there's people born that don't have any gumption at all. They get up in the morning and think, oh, fuck it, I'll just screw around all day. And other people like Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk, I'm going to go to Mars tomorrow. Oh, okay. People vary on these things, and we don't know why, right? I mean, a lot of it's genetic and environment, but there's also a factor of luck. You didn't pick your parents. You're just lucky. You feel ambitious and hard. You have a high need of achievement and all that stuff. Some people just don't. I will admit that's luck, right? A lot of that's luck. And yet there's still stories of people that somehow, they were down and out and they changed their life. They made a comeback, Now maybe you would say, well, they're determined to do that, and other people were determined not to do that. Okay.
I would.
I know.
And just because we don't understand, just because we don't have access to all of the steps along the way. So, for instance, we do not have enough access into the internal experience and histories of all people in order to do, what is that movie where Tom Cruise was predicting the future and holding people accountable?
Minority Report.
Minority Report. We do not have the capability to understand people's motivations enough to predict what they're going to do. But that doesn't mean that wouldn't actually be technically possible if we had all of the information. And I think that's where the compatibilist versus the determinist come into conflict, is because I think the compatibilist is always saying, well, there's always going to be something that is unpredictable. And I just don't understand why. Where is the freedom taking place? Who is making the free choice?
But the other point I'm making is that's not at the neuronal level. It's an emergent property of higher order functioning of the brain and society and so forth. So the analogy I make is, that inflation doesn't exist in the brain. It's not in quantum physics or whatever. It's a principle of economics. Sure. It's real. Economists treat it as real, and and so forth. And so we have to look at different areas of the brain functioning of society to get these.
So you're saying free will is real, like inflation is real in the sense that it has.
Yeah, it's an emergent property. And so consciousness as well. I would say consciousness is an emergent property of these complex systems. It doesn't exist in any neuron. There's no neuron that's conscious.
Sure.
Right? Consciousness as we think of it, and what it's like to be me or whatever, that's an emergent property of, 100 billion neurons or whatever firing.
So are you saying that, the feeling of consciousness is as epistemically true as the feeling of free will?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, and I do wonder if people are really are motivated, consciously or unconsciously, to hold on to to preserve the idea of free will, to preserve moral responsibility, because
there's some of that.
Useful.
Yeah, but of course that's just a kind of social consequences of your belief. That's a different issue probably than that. I'll just read to you from the book of Christian List's "Why Free Will Is Real" book. 3 characteristics of free will: intentional agency, the capacity to form an intention to pursue different possibilities. 2, alternative possibilities, the capacity to consider several possibilities for action. This is the could have done otherwise element. And 3, causal control, the capacity to take action to move toward one of those possibilities. So if you have all 3 of those, he says, then that gives you something like free will, or
something like free will. Yeah.
Compatibilism.
I mean, for me,
choice, volition. What's the word?
I look at those and I look at those as like, those are all qualities that we have, but that we are determined to have. And like even the impulse to imagine alternative realities is a determined impulse. And then the impulse that we use to choose between of those alternative realities are also determined impulses. So I look at it as determined all the way down, and I don't know. I don't see how that's any different than being
But
determined.
it's not tumors all the way down. So if we take the people like Charles Whitman, the shooter in the tower, any of these crazies, they do weird stuff, okay? But that's not you and me. I mean, these are people that have damaged brains. They're less, okay, Dan Dennett would say they have fewer degrees of freedom than you and I have. So instead of saying it's all black and white, it's all you're either free or you're determined, it's that there's degrees of freedom. And so most of us that are not drug addicted, alcoholics and so forth, we have more degrees of freedom than the alcoholic has, something like that.
But that's only so far as we understand how brains work, right? Like say that same incident had happened 200 years ago and we had no idea what tumors were or whatever. I don't even know when we knew what tumors were.
He was possessed by a demon.
He was possessed by a demon, like something like so. To me, it seems like a problem of just knowledge of how the brain works. And why is it that like someone who doesn't have a tumor in their brain or does not have alcoholism or is not, abused by their parents as a child, why would that person become a murderer, say? Mm-hmm. Like, we don't know, but that doesn't mean that it's unknowable.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Here's how, I'll just give you another example from my chapter here on Kevin Mitchell, neuroscientist, his book, Free Agents. Basic laws of physics that deal only with energy and matter and fundamental forces cannot explain what life is or its defining property. Living organisms do things for reasons as causal agents in their own right. They're driven not by energy, but by information. And the meaning of that information is embodied in the structure of the system itself based on its history. In short, there are fundamental, distinct types of causation at play in living organisms by virtue of their organization. That extension through time generates a new kind of causation that is not seen in most physical processes, one based on the record of history in which information about past events continues to play a causal role in the present. Right? So again, you're just, instead of energy and quantum physics and physics of your determined world, think of information. And the husband or the cheating husband is using information from the wife, like, oh, I better not do this again. That's a kind of volition, a kind of self-determinism.
I disagree, though, because I think that treating that data and how that affects the brain it sounds to me like it's more of making a woo-woo argument, as if information is fundamentally different than energy.
But it is different.
I mean, it's different in the sense that information isn't going to move a particle, but but in terms of like it having an impact on how the brain itself, from which the consciousness emerges, like it is going to be calculating based upon the information what is the correct, what to do about the information that comes our way. But the way that it processes that information is still determined. It's still determined by everything that came before it, and also by the limitations of the brain in that moment. Like I would argue that somebody who doesn't have a bad history and doesn't have a mental illness and doesn't have a tumor still has bad machinery if they choose to make to murder somebody in cold blood, just in this one particular circumstance where they felt the impulse to do so. And so, like, I feel like that's where I come into conflict with the compatibilist view, if only because I think that sometimes when compatibilists talk about it, it's like they're saying that determinists are saying there should be no consequences for people's actions. And that's not what determinists say. Consequences are important inputs. It's just that everything, including information, should be treated as an input that determines people's actions and choices.
Here's what Dan Dennett writes.
I read the book, Michael.
Oh, you
I
read
know what he read.
Okay. You're the one. All right. Okay.
What do you say about this, sir?
Well, again, I'm just repeating myself. I mean, going forward, it hasn't happened yet. And so you are part of the causal net of the universe.
But
yes,
what is you? What is you?
Okay, what is you? That's you. That's the package. The fuzzy set that represents you and all your personality characteristics and memories of everything you've done in the past. So tomorrow I'm going to do X. Okay, so the example I use is, I'm going to get up tomorrow morning early. It's Tuesday morning, meet the guys for 7 a.m., right? So I got to get up early and so on. I know I'm going to be lazy and grumpy and dopey in the morning, so I'm going to set out my workout clothes tonight. So future Shermer is going to be a certain way that current Shermer knows that future Shermer is going to be like. So I'm going to do something about that now. All right, who's doing that? I am. I'm doing that. I'm making that choice.
Right, but how are you not determined in that function? You said that you is that history of memories and also I think this is the fundamental issue. Is there something special and woo-woo about you? Because
no,
you
I don't think
are
so.
just you're just an emergent property of the brain that has memories, but also hormones. So, how are you undetermined in the present moment?
I'm not undetermined. It's a compatibilist workaround argument that the past is determined, but the future is not predetermined, and you're part of the causal net. I'll just keep repeating myself.
Okay.
Again, it's in the bin of unknowable because these words. You're just saying, but that's all determined. Yeah, okay. What do you mean by that? Is there really a self?
Well, I mean that there's
really
nothing special about the present moment that makes it any different than the past present moment. The present moment is utterly and totally informed by the past. There's no special moment when the causal chain breaks is basically what I'm suggesting.
That's right. But you're part of the causal chain. You are.
But what is me?
What is me? It's okay. Maybe the self is an illusion, but back to where we were with meditation. But, it's a useful construct that there is a you inside your skull. There's a body that represents you. And yes, you have friends and spouses and so, but there's still a you, right? And you're making that decision. Going forward, you're part of the causal net. You don't get to be free of the causal net. You're part of it. It's not happening to you. It's happening with you. You're with the process. You're involved in it. My dog, less, fewer degrees of freedom, and so on down the phylogenetic tree. Anyway, that's where I am.
Sure. Okay. All right. Is there anything
that's
else?
why it's in the bin of unknowable, because what do you mean by these words? Okay, so round and round we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for this discussion, Michael. Is there anything that I've missed that you wanted to bring up about the book?
The religion thing, we touched on it a little bit. I have no idea if you're religious or not, but I'm trying something new in the book of acknowledging religious truths as having great value, like great literature. And that great literature, Jane Austen novels, Dostoevsky novels, J.R.R. Tolkien's, Middle Earth did not really exist, but you're missing the point if you're asking that question, right? And I think biblical stories or any great religious traditions like that have stories are not meant to be taken literally true, and that they can carry truths with them, and that's okay. We should acknowledge that, okay? And a lot of Christians...
fairy tales.
Yeah, except calling them fairy tales sounds a little degrading. I mean, mythological truths, right? So you've heard Jordan Peterson or maybe Joseph Campbell ramble on about dragons. Okay, there's no real dragons. Or maybe there was furry lizards or whatever. It doesn't matter. The dragons is a story that represents something about the human condition. And that there's certain things we should do to make our lives better. There's certain things we could do to make our lives worse. The good dragon, the bad dragon, whatever. The dragon doesn't exist.
We shouldn't be taking it literally is the point.
Yes, that's right, yeah. Now, most religious people will go with me some of the way on this journey. But for some reason, so I have a long discussion of this in the book on the resurrection of Jesus. For some reason, Christians insist this absolutely had to have happened, or else there's no reason to be a Christian. To which I say, yeah, then if the evidence, so you're putting in the bin of empirical truths that I can show you why you should believe, not just me, but you should accept Jesus as your Savior also. And here's the arguments. The women went to the tomb. It was empty. The people saw him after his death, after 3 days, and so on and so forth. Okay, then I say, why don't Jews believe it? And you can't say, well, they're just not smart enough, or they don't know the arguments. They didn't read so-and-so's book. Yes, they did. They know the arguments, right? The Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, prophesizes that the Messiah will not be anything like Jesus. He will be a great conquering hero, warrior that comes and overturns the Romans, and so on and so forth. They'll create a new, civilization, a new, born again, rebirth, our tribe, right? That's what it was. So, and that's not who Jesus was. I mean, he was arrested. His trial lasted probably 5 minutes, and then he's executed with 2 other thieves. He's a nobody. That's not what the Jews thought Jesus would be like. Okay, my point is that these are different kinds of truths for people. There's no one right one. If you're an anthropologist from Mars going, which is the right religion on Earth, that's the wrong question. There's no right answer. It's a different kind of thing.
Okay. So I guess the only thing that I'm sticking on that is why call it a truth if it's not an empirical truth?
Well, because people use this word a lot. This is my personal truth or whatever. Okay. Yeah, maybe it's a preference. Maybe that's not the right word. But truth works because, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, I'm a Buddhist, whatever. That's your truth.
Why can't you call it a belief?
Yeah, okay, it's a belief. Yeah, it's a kind of a belief. That's fine, too. Yeah, it is. That's right.
Okay.
But you wouldn't say, I believe in the theory of gravity or I believe in the germ theory
right?
of disease.
Like, because a truth is a justified
Yeah.
true belief about objective reality.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's important to, keep the word truth special.
Yeah,
To...
I'd go with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Talked me into one thing.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. If I had more time, I bet I could talk you into determinism. But
you're not the only one.
Time.
I mean, Jerry Coyne's, he's been hammering me on the determinism stuff. But, Dan Dennett was a much smarter philosopher than I'm not even a philosopher,
the way I look at Daniel Dennett's argument, and I've read it,
Yeah.
my husband's a huge fan of Daniel Dennett, and this is the one thing that he disagrees with him on, and I agree to disagree with him on, is I feel like he is just changing terminology in order to make free will makes sense and he's very openly because I want to hold people morally responsible. He says it himself. I want to be held morally responsible, and I want to hold others morally responsible. And I think that is a really interesting moment of a philosopher who is dedicated to making empirical truthful claims, sort of openly being but I have confirmation bias on this, so here it is. I'm okay.
But again, the free will and consciousness issues, they may be different from these other empirical truths. They're conceptually different than the Big Bang or evolution or whatever, climate change, could be right, could be wrong. I think it's a different thing. That's what I think is going on.
Well, I'm just curious about your position that free will is similarly inaccessible to empirical evidence the way consciousness is, because for me consciousness at the very least is in the same way that sadness and the fact that I am I am aware, I am alert, I am aware, experiences are happening to me, there is qualia. The fact that there is qualia is an empirical fact, right?
Yes.
That is true. I don't think the same thing could be said about free will. I feel like free will can be determined, free will is an illusion the way that consciousness is not an illusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
So that's just where I sort of am at. I don't know. But
Okay.
let's go have a drink about that sometime. How about that?
See, you're going to choose to go have a drink.
I mean...
Who chose that? Amanda did.
No, it was predetermined.
No, it was my Adams. It was Amanda's Adams.
All of my history led up to this moment of saying,
That's
let's go
right.
get a drink. All right. Thank you, Michael. It's been
All
a
right.
pleasure.
Thanks, Amanda. You're welcome.
Take care.
Thank you.